4 Hockey East teams in the national top 10 and a boatload of Nesson coverage for you this week as we dive into another This Week in Hockey East. Hey everybody, with Eric Galante, I'm Tyler Murray. Great to see you again, everybody. And man, we are getting into the thick of things in Hockey East Conference play. Great action coming up on both the men's and women's side. And how about a Thursday matchup on Nesson to get us going early, Eric? I think we're going to learn a lot about both UMass and Providence as they get a home-and-home started.
Yeah, top 15 matchup Thursday night. I've been looking at Providence a lot, and I think the thing that's interesting is, sometimes at this point of a season, you try to see, is there one stat that stands out? Hey, this is why this team's playing so well. And with Providence, there's a couple of numbers. Their defense has been really good. They haven't allowed shots. They're both top 5 nationally in those two categories, but that's kind of been par for the course for Providence. And the thing that really stands out is that there isn't a number that stands way out. That's an outlier. They're just playing well. They're playing well all across the board. And that's what really stands out about this Providence team, I think. You look at what the Friars have done. They had themselves a nice weekend against UNH last weekend. Let's start in goal with Philip Svedback, who's been excellent. He's been especially good in Hockey East play. Here are the numbers so far. He's 5th nationally in goals against average for the full season, and he's played by far the most games of anyone in the top 5. So, he's been really good in that sense too. But in Hockey East games, he's 4-0-2 with a 1.13 goals against and a 946 save percentage. So he's been as good as anyone in these conference games since the Friars to begin conference play. That's number one. Number two, maybe a few too many penalties here and there for Providence, but the penalty kill's been really good. It's top 10 penalty kill nationally for Providence. And then we've always talked about the shot numbers. We did an episode on this earlier this season where Providence, the last couple of years, they dominate in shots for, they dominate, but they aren't necessarily scoring at the same rate. They've been below 10% on their shooting percentage the last couple of years. Well, this year so far, their shooting percentage is in a good spot. It's over 10%. And what does that mean? It means that they're scoring at a pretty good rate, but not at an unsustainable rate at some of the 13, 14% at this point in the season. So it makes you believe that they can keep playing at the level that they're playing at. They've been off to a really good start. They've challenged themselves schedules-wise, which stands out. They have a win against Denver, as we talked about that series against Michigan earlier in the season. So there's a lot of reasons to believe this Providence team is going to continue to play well. That shots allowed number, that's going to be important this week because UMass does not have a ton of shots on their ledger so far this year. So how does UMass generate offense against this Providence team that allows one of the fewest shot totals in the country? That's the big storyline in this game. You look at UMass, try to bouncing back a little bit from last weekend. They gave up 6 unanswered against Vermont in the second game of the series after getting a win on Friday. So a little bit of a bounce back there. But the thing that UMass has been exceptional at this year is the faceoff. They're 3rd nationally in faceoff percentage. So that sort of mitigates that shot number a little bit because they're able to get possession so much on their faceoff. So is this a game that resembles what we saw last week with Northeastern? Again, a team that doesn't generate a ton of shots for, and Providence limits a little bit the way they did last week? Or can UMass find some of that offense? That's kind of the big storylines out of this week's game.
And that'll be a great one. Top 15 matchup, as you said. How about a top 10 matchup at Agganis Arena on Friday, 7 o'clock on Nesson, and then Saturday at 6 o'clock on ESPN+. BU is number 8. They're hosting Maine, who's up to the top 10 at number 9 for 2 games in Boston this weekend. The Black Bears, of course, they knocked off number 1 BC. It's their second ever win against a top-ranked team at the Alphon. They had beaten UNH in a top 3 matchup back in January of 2000. That year, they made it to the Frozen Four for the second consecutive season. Now, was it a one-off? Was it a fluke? I don't think so. They outshot Boston College in both games, and they were 5 minutes away from a 6-point weekend. But in the end, that BC offense, it just felt inevitable they were going to get that game-tying goal from Ryan Leonard. Impressive stuff there from the Eagles. But Maine, it's their first 3-0 start to Hockey East play since 2005. And our volunteer contributor, BU Hockey Stats, with another great note. It's the first BU and Maine top 10 matchup since 2010. And the success for Maine against top teams under Ben Barr is interesting. They are now 5-1-2 against Boston College since he took over. Now, they haven't had as much success against BU. They're 1-5. We'll dive into the Terriers in a bit. But I just keep thinking, Eric, Lyndon Breen walked so Josh and Bradley Nadeau could run. I mean, Breen was carrying such a heavy scoring load the last few years. He's no longer underrated. He is an absolute star, Lyndon Breen, but now he's got more skill and more depth around him. So those three guys, Breen and the Nadeaus, they've all got 10 points. And the only other teams in Hockey East with three guys at or above 10 points, well, it's BU and BC. They each have 4. So a lot more firepower for Ben Barr this year. And, it's changed the game up in Orono. Now, the Terriers, they went from no regulation wins in their first 3 games to unbeaten in regulation in their last 7. So 5-1-1 for BU during this stretch. And that includes a come-from-behind shootout win at UMass, where they never actually led in the game. And then that overtime loss to North Dakota, where Lane Hudson got a hat trick in that game. His older brother, Quinn Hudson, gets a hat trick against Lowell on Saturday. So the whole family's making it happen. But let's focus on Lane, as we often do. 6 goals for him in his last 4 games. That's more than any other defenseman in the country has scored all season long. And those 6 goals have come on just 13 shots for Lane Hudson. They say a lot. Our guy Bernie Corbett on the BU broadcast says his shot has eyes, and it's just finding a way through any kind of defense lately. So Lane Hudson and Macklin Celebrini tied for the Hockey East lead with 8 goals, along with Boston College's superstar Cutter Gauthier. Celebrini, a career-high 4 assists on Saturday. He's now tied for the national lead with 18 points. And look, Lowell is banged up, we know that, but BU hadn't swept the Riverhawks since 2010. It's a very difficult thing to do. Boston College did it as well, so a feather in their cap. And we know the offense is always going to be elite for BU, but it's the improvements on the defensive end that's going to get the Terriers to where they want to go. So a season low 20 shots allowed on Friday. And then Matthew Caron, their transfer goaltender from Brown, he stopped 28 of 29 shots on Saturday. So if that continues to be a strength of this team, what they do on the back end, it could be a really good test, and it's going to be for the Maine Black Bears, and can't wait to watch it.
You know, a couple of things on Maine that stand out. We mentioned that UMass was so good at the faceoff. There's only one team in Hockey East who's better. That's Maine on the faceoff so far. That's number one. And number two, you know, you look at this time of year, and I'm always curious about, is it sustainable what some of these teams are doing? And Maine's a really good example of a team that actually could be playing even better than they are right now, as hard as that is to believe. Mike McMahon did an interesting breakdown. He writes a Substack newsletter, College Hockey Insider, and he took some in-stat data to show the difference between the number of goals that you've scored this year versus the number of expected goals based on shot area. It's not a perfect metric, but if you just go off that, Maine actually had the second biggest differential of their expected goals to the goals that they've scored in a negative way, which you think would be, hey, they're not scoring as much as they could be based on their expected goals. And yet their record is what it is so far. So it's kind of amazing to think that, hey, this Maine team could actually be even better than they're playing. Now, they showed a little bit of that against Boston College, certainly, and it'll be interesting to see the test they have against BU this weekend. You talked about it. We got a ton of Nesson games this week. It's awesome to see another one Saturday afternoon at 3:30 as BU goes on the road to take on Providence on the women's side. Big week for BU. It's a 3-game week for the Terriers, including an 11 a.m. special against Boston College on Friday before taking on Providence on Saturday. We won't spend a ton of time on BU because we talked about them last week, and we talked about how they're really dominating in terms of their shot numbers. They're way up there in shots, way up there in fewest shots allowed. That's allowed them to really be effective in terms of controlling the game. We'll see if they can do that against a Providence team that is trying slowly but surely to dig out of a little bit of a bad start. The one positive for Providence is the fact that this week they play the 2 teams directly ahead of them in the standings. So play Merrimack on Friday. They play BU on Saturday. Those are the 2 teams right ahead of them so far. So the Friars, you know, again, a little bit of a slow start to begin the season. Their shot numbers are coming up a little bit here recently. And I thought it was important last week. They fell behind 1-0 in the second game against BU, just 67 seconds into that game after dropping the first game. But after that point, they scored 3 unanswered to get the win on Saturday. Maybe that's the kind of momentum game against Northeastern they can dig out of going into this weekend. So that's at 3:30 on Saturday afternoon.
Excited to see that one. And man, it's piling up, the schedule. We're going Wednesday all the way through the weekend here this week. It's an exciting time as we head toward the Thanksgiving and then eventually semester break. All right, a little bit of time left, Eric. How about some short shifts? And I'm going to go first because this one's wild. You got the 3 highest scoring freshmen in the country right now, all play for Hockey East. You know the names, Macklin Celebrini, and then the two BC kids, Gabe Perreault and Will Smith. UMass's Jack Musa and Providence's Tanner Adams not far behind. But you've been tracking this stat all year, Eric. Gabe Perreault has scored or assisted on Boston College's last 7 goals over their last 3 games. He's now the national leader in assists per game, and that doesn't show up in the box score, but if he did not score in his shootout opportunity, it was after the first 3 rounds had gone, then BC loses that game, and it's a 5-point weekend for Maine. Man, he came through big time against Victor Osman in the clutch. So that is a weekend for Boston College where you have to grow up pretty quick, a young, talented team. And the way they came back and won that shootout in a loaded and electric Alfond Arena, I think that's going to carry them a long way when they get into a do-or-die hockey later on in the year. So, yes, big weekend for Maine, but tip of the cap to BC. And, man, the Celebrini, Perreault, Smith, the list goes on of the young talent we've got once again reloading the Hockey East talent pool this year.
And you can keep going, right? Ryan Leonard scored in 4 games in a row. We don't even mention it. I mean, it's kind of amazing, all the freshmen, and Jacob Fowler standing out as a freshman goalie. It'll be interesting this week. You have a couple of the star freshmen this year for Boston College against a couple of the star freshmen from last year with Cutter Gauthier and Matthew Wood in the house for UConn this weekend in a home and home. Couple other short shifts. Let's first of all shout out to Vermont this weekend. This past week on Friday, they broke the Hockey East women's attendance record, over 2,700 fans for their game Friday against BC. That's awesome to see. A couple of other teams are going to be competing to try to break that record this year. We mentioned BC starting at 11 a.m. on Friday, so that'll be fun to watch. But shout out to Vermont and all their fans coming out for that big weekend. I also want to shout out the UConn women who have been playing exceptionally well under the radar here. They have the Hockey East Player of the Week and Goalie of the Week. Once again, they've won 6 consecutive games, have the Huskies, and most notably, they've outscored their opponents 18-2 in those 6 games. Pretty impressive stuff from UConn. Tia Chan, her last 3 games, 75 saves, just 1 goal allowed. She has 2 1-0 wins in that span. And then Jada Habish, 4 straight game-winning goals, 6 consecutive games with a point. Again, the Hockey East Player of the Week. So UConn's playing extremely well. Now they're playing the giant killer Holy Cross coming up this weekend. They've been pretty consistently good against some top teams. So can UConn keep it rolling here? They're 7-3-1 overall.
And I'll just wrap up with maybe the most exciting news of the week. Beanpot tickets are on sale. Yes, the 71st annual Dunkin' Beanpot is coming back to the Garden. Of course, a lot of folks have their eyes on the marquee matchup. 8 o'clock Monday, February 5th, BU against BC. That'll obviously be a classic game, but even more exciting, the Women's Beanpot Championship will be at TD Garden for the first time ever. The semifinals will be on Harvard's campus of the Bright Landry Hockey Center, but really cool step forward for the women's game to be able to showcase just all the talent we've been able to highlight this year on This Week in Hockey East. They'll have both the consolation game and the championship game on the Garden Ice Tuesday, January 23rd. Northeastern has a little bit of a dynasty going in the Beanpot, but they shockingly might come into this year's Beanpot as underdogs. And I think in a few weeks, we're going to have to make our very own episode just previewing this incredible tournament. I spent 4 years in Florida, Eric, to start my broadcast career, and Beanpot season rolls around. I might have been the only guy in the state who cared about it, but man, I'm so happy to be back up here when I'm not so alone. Can't wait for it. And I know you're excited too. Our tickets are on sale Monday, Ticketmaster.com. I mean, any lean for you? Any hot takes on Beanpot?
Far too early for that. But boy, that BU BC game. Remember the game a couple of years ago between those two? The last time they played in the first round, it's shaping up to be something special.
Can't wait for it, and can't wait to bring you some great Hockey East action this week and weekend. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of This Week in Hockey East.